We've listened to the 4 speakers, so I'll be calling each of the speakers up on stage. My name is Bola Joshua. I'll be moderating this session. Hopefully, your questions will not be as difficult as that the governor had to answer. The first person to come up will be Professor Chukwuma Soludo. Dr. Gupta, can you please come up? His Excellency Peter Obi and Bismark Rewane. So you next.
Good to see you. So we're all mic'd up.
Yes, you're all mic'd up. Okay, to take as many questions as possible, you have 2 minutes for each of the questions. I remember Bismarck said we should move away from measuring activities to measuring results. The first question will be for Professor Soludo. Now, Nigeria has had a series of economic plans. In fact, it looks as if when one plan is about to end, we start a new one for the deliverables we have not achieved. Now, a new economic management team, advisory team, has been set up. In the presentations, it seemed like some disclaimers were already being issued. However, we would like to know the 3 key things that Nigeria should expect from this economic management team, Economic Advisory Council. I remember when you were speaking, you said you had to edit your presentation because you had been made a member of the Economic Advisory Council. However, there's an African proverb that says that when the masquerade has come out, it can no longer apply makeup. So, can you please give us the 3 reasons, sir?
Thank you very much. Sir, 2 minutes, and you want me to say 3 things. The first one, again, will have to be a disclaimer, namely that if I learned something in my previous life, I lived a life as an advisor. You don't advise in camera. You don't advise, in public. You don't give advice to your principal on the pages of newspapers. So, my first point is that I'm not going to be telling you the things that I will probably say in the council. It's only for the ears and eyes of the principal. When you advise as an advisor, if the principal takes what you have advised, it's no longer yours, it belongs to the principal. And if it doesn't, it's still not yours, you don't come out in public to say so. So I wouldn't address that. But let me get on to the premise of what you said about each time a plan is made and, as it's going implemented. One fundamental point to note, we often think that a plan, you cannot legislate politics out of public policy. It's a fundamental point, and I find that point often missing in much of public discourse. That's why you are in a democracy. In a multi-party democracy, the reason for elections is that people get on to contest alternative viewpoints as to how society should go and present alternative plan of action. When they get elected, they must have liberty to change what exists or to take a different trajectory. And that's why if you find Trump was basically had repudiated much of the regulatory frameworks that were put in place by Obama. If you get to the UK, whether a Labour Party or a Conservative Party wins, you have a different plan. You have a new Queen's speech, as it were. So they will always go with the wind of politics. And I said so in my presentation. There is nothing like an all-time plan that is invariant to time, space, and participants. You will then legislate politics out of it. Then you go to an autocracy. You have a military regime, or you have the China type of regime, one-party state that stays there forever. So far as you have multi-party democracy, frequent elections that come and go, you are going to be having, that's what the public vote for. I just want to make that point. And finally, to say that, go back to the point that I made before, namely about the structure of what you do. Each government tries to tinker, in my view, at the margins. But the fundamental structure that we're trying to patch some cracked walls, and each government has patched it so differently. But I think, going forward, sooner or later, we may have to get to the root of it and redesign the house itself, or the foundation in terms of what it can carry. Thank you.
Okay, coming to you, Dr. Gupta. When you speak to most local and international analysts, there are three key things they believe Nigeria must deal with if we need to move ahead: fuel subsidies, power subsidies, and unification of the exchange rates. Do you think we can make the desired progress with the status quo, or must it change?
I think, all three are very challenging questions. Of those, I would pick one, which in some ways, let's say, maybe the less challenging one. But once again, what is challenging or not has to be looked at within the context of Nigeria's reality and the political reality also. But I think the one area I would say is electricity, because when I look at any economy, if you look at the analogy of the lung, the heart, and the head. Okay, so the head is, of course, the brain, the policy planning bodies, the cabinet, the leader of the country, in terms of how they think. The heart really has to be about what's good for people, what's good for the citizens, in particular in terms of employment and income levels. But the lungs, which make let's say the heartbeat, the lungs, that's electricity. And I think of all the economic issues that need to be tackled, I would say power is probably number one. And so the scarcity of power. And so the question is, again, in most emerging economies, including Nigeria, one reason that you have scarcity of power is because there is not enough money to actually invest in power. And one of the reasons, and again, so it comes down to, say, return on investment. So if you have too much subsidization, that creates problems because it makes people unaware of the real cost of electricity. So if there is subsidization of water, subsidization of electricity, that leads to, let's say, less efficient usage, but it also means less revenue. So if I look at one of the things that Modi in India, he did after becoming prime minister, is to actually start getting rid of subsidies. And he already did that in his state when he was the chief minister of Gujarat. So he knew that removing subsidies may be unpalatable to the people in the beginning, but actually it is beneficial even within a period of 5 years.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the next question is for you. If you look at the countries with the top 10 population in the world, Nigeria has had the highest population growth rate over the last 20 years. We've grown that population by 78%. Now, out of those top 10 countries, we have the lowest average age of the population at 18 years of age. Now, how do we convert that youthful population into a competitive advantage, given the massive inequality we have in the country and given the propensity for an unemployed and uneducated workforce to become a form of social disturbance?
Well, if I understand you, is how do we convert into assets?
Yes.
Simply. Very simple. Invest in education, proper education. And it's very easy to invest in education. I've said it before. That with the money you're wasting in various subsidies and everything, you can convert into education. And by doing that, you see that you can unleash your greatest assets today is this youth. Like Prof said, it's your next oil, and you need to invest in it. As we move from, call it baggage or industrial economy to knowledge economy, it's shown obviously that today, you don't need to waste your time except to invest in this. Look at, you just mentioned the 10 biggest economies. Those 10 biggest economies, if you look at them today, the biggest or the richest countries we are dependent on oil. If we're talking about oil today, Brazil and Venezuela have 10 times more oil than Nigeria. And it's not getting them anywhere, they collapse. But if you go to America, not even Texas, that is the biggest economy, is California. Without oil, they have about 2.6 trillion, which is 6 times Nigeria. So what are they doing? They're investing in knowledge. So you can invest, all we need to do is to invest in knowledge, train them, and like I said, some of them are people who are entrepreneurial. Support them by various means possible, and you unleash the potential.
Okay, Bismark, if you look at the telecoms sector, it's been one of the runaway successes over the last 20 years. Now, if you look at how much was paid by MTN when they were coming into Nigeria, MTN paid $285 million. If you look at what has been an offshoot of what they paid, just look at the income made from banks, from electronic banking. Half year 2019, the banks made $290 million. That means the revenues the banks made from electronic banking, riding on the telco revolution, was more than the license MTN paid. If you look at the Pension Reform Act of 2004, when we started, pensions was in shambles. Today, we have over 9 trillion naira in the pension assets. And they've invested 6.4 trillion in federal government debt. If you look at the debt of the federal government, actually 50% is funded by our own pensions. Imagine that industry did not exist. So how do we unleash the potentials of other sectors to have such a transformational effect, so we don't just have 1, 2 shining lights across the industry?
That's a very interesting question. But the reality is that the telecom sector has their contribution to GDP is maybe about 10%, but the indirect contribution to GDP in terms of productivity gains because of the technology impact on other sectors is much more profound. Not only that, the electronic banking system, which relies on the telcos, increases the velocity of circulation of money, right? So when you have an increase in the velocity of circulation of money, it also, unlocks credit, which is the settlement process, right? So you have that Fisher equation relationship, where because the velocity of circulation of money has increased, settlement has increased, then it has an impact on output and GDP, right? So you have, but the telco sector itself doesn't employ a lot of people. It's not a job elastic area, but it enhances productivity. And productivity plus technology gives you an increase in output. So I think that's one of the areas which this technology revolution is taking place. How much more impactful, and how can we use that sector as a model, right? It means that when the MTN paid $286 million, at that time, before then, you had the bidding of NITEL, which was then the government-owned parastatal. First Bank paid a non-refundable deposit of $182 million for NITEL as a whole. That money was forfeited eventually because they didn't win. 10 years later, I think, NITEL was sold for less than half the price of the non-refundable deposit. So the value of NITEL as an institution, right, had dropped by over 90% in a period of about 10 to 15 years. Now, you talked about the mobilization of savings, what we call involuntary savings by the defined contribution system of the pension scheme. Yes, the pension scheme is there. That in 2004, it's one of those major revolutionary steps that was taken by the Obasanjo administration. I think more than the telco revolution, that scheme of savings, total savings, right, compulsory savings has helped. But how do you channel those savings to sectors that need credit? How do you channel those savings into investment? How do you convert savings into investment? Because if not, you're caught in the paradox of thrift, which means that you have savings and you actually, it has a negative multiplier effect on output. So that, again, goes back to the structural transformation of the economy, which means that you are tinkering with the tactical issues while the structure needs to be changed. That's what Professor Soludo was talking about. The foundation needs to be structurally reformed so that you can now build for, one, accelerated growth, and two, without creating macroeconomic instability. I don't want to bore people with all those things, but the reality is that you must increase output and you must increase employment. If you don't do those two things, nobody's interested.
Okay. So I'll come back to you again, Mr. Peter Obi, on cost of governance. You spoke about the cost of governance. In fact, there was a joke on social media when the emoluments of the senators was bandied around. Someone said that the senators in the state, what they collect is more than the gross earnings of the most productive company in the state. I won't mention the name of the state so that I can still be here after platform. So, how do we reduce the cost of governance in the country? Because you've practically demonstrated it running a state. How do we reduce the cost of governance? But most importantly, how do we channel those savings to more productive areas of the economy from both a national and a subnational perspective?
Well, I think that question would have gone to Lagos State Governor because he's now in government. They are the ones who, but let me tell you, if you go, let me look at what is happening now with the issue of our federal government. We have a situation where our recurrent expenditure is almost about 5 trillion, and our revenue is about 3 trillion. That is not sustainable. That's why I said before, we're just borrowing money and throwing it away. The consequence that it is not impacting on anything, even what you said about the pension. Once they have money they borrow, they won't be able to pay it. They will devalue the currency, and that pension will be wasted. How do we do it? It's a very simple thing. It's to look at the 36 states have different income strata. I was governor in Anambra State. And when I came there, I found out that most of the things that we engage in, or civil servants will tell you, oh, this is how Lagos State do it. We can't afford it. For example, in Anambra State, we had a very massive governor's lodge in Abuja, which my predecessor bought for about ₦1 billion, and it was costing us almost 20-something million to keep it. Why would Governor of Anambra have a house in Abuja? I don't live in Abuja. So I gave it away. We had a structure in Lagos here called Governor's Lodge. The governor of Anambra doesn't have anything to do with Lagos. So I gave it away. We had about 10 guest houses. We had about 10 guest houses in Anambra State. Governor's guest house. And they said, what are we doing with it? If anybody comes to see the governor, wherever, we are building a presidential lodge in Abuja. I've said it here before. Presidential lodge. If we had to go and visit Obasanjo, who said he was here? I said, no, the president doesn't live in Anambra State. So we can't have a house for you here. If you come, when Obasanjo said he would come, I said, you can come in the morning and go in the evening. You're the president of the country. You don't need to sleep in Anambra State. And that's in my position. You doesn't need to. You have all sorts of things. I give you an example of one expense. When I started, I did one street. And they gave me the cost of putting street lights on that street, a long stretch of road. They gave me the cost of putting a street light. And the list direct to government house, to governor's lodge, and it will be fantastic. When they gave me the cost, I asked the people who brought the cost, I said, listen, we have 520 secondary schools. These children are in darkness. Can you give me the cost of putting a 30 kVA generator in all of them? You will not believe it. The cost of doing that street light and the generator was cheaper by 10%. And I told them, I said, we can stay in darkness. Buy 520 generators for all secondary schools in the state. And that's what we did. So you can. There's so many other things, so many other costs that if I stay here and tell you, you won't believe it. They put an end of the year. In 1 year, we are to do end of the year party. That if I tell you the cost, you will not believe. I say, what type of party? We are not in the business of dancing. And I can go on, or people visit. Like one of the president visited us. They said, if the president has slept that night, it would have cost us over 20 million doing a gala dinner for him. And I said, listen, Mr. President, you have to go. Please, you can go to our neighboring states who are rich. And he went to a neighboring state. I accompanied him there.
Okay.
Because they can afford that. You see, what Lagos State can afford, Anambra State cannot afford. We cannot. So it is a question of, there's a lot of cost of governance here. It's too high, it's unacceptable. There's so many things you can cut and use the resources to be able to meet the obligation. 2 minutes is not enough for me to expatiate it to you, but I can tell you there's a huge things you can cost away that is causing problems.
Okay, Dr. Gupta. The next question is for you. In the 80s, we witnessed a massive, brain drain from Nigeria. And then, in the last 20 years, we saw a lot of people coming back, telco revolution, banking sector, oil and gas. Now, in the last few years, we're witnessing another massive brain drain. If you speak to most companies in Nigeria today, the first strategy they have in the human resource department is a Canada strategy. If you don't have a Canada strategy, you've not started. If I ask how many people in this audience below 40 now have accessed a particular site on how to emigrate to Canada, you'll be surprised. So, and we want to compete in the knowledge economy. How do we, I know the Pastor Koju asked the governor of Lagos State, well, he said he's a subnational. He doesn't set policies at that level. So from a country perspective, how do we retain talent to be able to compete in the emerging knowledge economy?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at the policies that China and India adopted, because they also had massive brain drain in the 80s and 90s and so on. And India always had, like I migrated from India to the US in 1975 because even at that time, India had a very laissez-faire policy. It's your life, you decide, we are not going to get in the way. And it has never changed that policy. China used to have restrictions, but China also very rapidly liberalized and essentially laissez-faire. If I look at what has happened and what people who study this phenomenon have come to the conclusion is that actually one should not be so much worried about brain drain because eventually it also leads to brain recirculation. And so, for instance, India's IT sector is extremely robust. And one of the feeders into that, the robustness of the IT sector, is the brain circulation, number one. Number two, if you look at the big American giant companies, in vast number of them, the CIO is an Indian American. So therefore, they know what India can do, and that helps. Similarly, China is trying to move up the technology ladder. And so the Chinese who came to the US for graduate studies and then started working in the tech sector. So I would say that most often, worries about brain drain might actually be misplaced. And that's, because eventually it will become brain circulation. The focus really, I would say, would be in terms of, not on the brain drain side, but how to make economic activity within the country more, let's say, attractive. Either because that will mean people choose not to go, or they choose to come back. So that would be my perspective on this.
Okay, thank you. Professor Soludo, this question is for you. This question was actually sent in by one of the viewers. It was sent in by an elder statesman, Dr. Christopher Kolade. And he said, listening to all the discussions, it's very obvious we need a significant policy change. Now, he said, we as the followers, what are we supposed to do? Everybody speaks of what the leaders are supposed to do. What are the followers supposed to do to get that change that is desired?
Yeah, I think this one is a very, part of the thesis that I try to develop is what I call the citizen's power. I have articulated sometime what I call citizens united of some sort. And in my presentation, I did say that every modern progressive society that you see today is a function of organization, struggles, continuous contestations among or between interest groups. Every society is a work in progress. Every society is a work in progress towards a more perfect union. But there is no progress anywhere without, especially in a democratic order, without the active participation of the citizenry. It is the citizens, and I put it there in my own lecture, in my own presentation, that is an organized, active citizenship, active citizenry that holds the public to account. That is the key to the future. You see, in the UK, you heard of the expense scandal. I don't know if some of you who followed that, the MP expense scandal. It's the citizens' power. See, all these things about even the issue of cost of governance and the obscene lifestyles of public office holders and so on and so forth. It's simply, it can only go on if the citizens let it to happen. In the case of the UK, I remember I was in London at some point when that debate was going on, and I was listening to a radio program, and somebody phoned in and was very angry that the MP, when an MP went to a hotel and took a chocolate from the refrigerator in the hotel. He said that hotel, the expense was billed, I think, £3.99 for in the hotel. And he was so angry, he says, why couldn't that, excuse the language, he just called him a bastard. Walk downstairs, go across the street and buy the same chocolate for £1.99. Why did he spend my money? That's the way he was putting it. He was spending £3.99 to take the chocolate because it is not his money. It's me. I paid this money. I walk an hour and da. And I think until a lot of things are connected. A lot of things are connected. I talked about the Fiscal Responsibility Bill, Fiscal Responsibility Act, a new Fiscal Responsibility Act that would change the whole incentive structure towards public service. If you take, for example, if that act constrains all governments at all levels to meet their recurrent expenditures out of their generated income, and then all income from rents, from solid minerals, oil, and so on and so forth, to be channeled to either physical and human infrastructure. Let's say, for example, now, if you want to buy 50 cars to drive, you go and generate the revenue. By the time you go to tax A, B, C, D, the people are going to rise up and ask, why are you driving 5 vehicles? You should, when one will be enough for you. But when the people are just, it's government money, and the government money comes from where? It's government money. They have no clue. As the governor said, 700,000 people, Nigerians have forgotten what it means to pay even for public service. And therefore, the demand for accountability on the part of the citizenry is itself very low. Once he takes it, the same people go and say, give it to me. Once you give it to them, that's okay. But all I'm saying is that it goes on to the issue, the central function of the citizenry is participation. We must take more than a casual interest in public affairs. I said, it's too serious to be left to people who call themselves politicians. It is a matter of our destiny. Anybody who has anything to offer, and the collective citizenry, you don't have to be in the ring contesting for election. You must take active interest in what goes on. Because in the end, if you don't take interest, if you don't agitate, organize, and be part of a movement, at least do your own part. If you don't, as I said in my own presentation, then stop complaining. An active citizenry that holds the people accountable and that actively participates in the political process is the way that all other societies in the world have been built, and we have no escape from that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Rewane, the next question is actually for you. In 2004, Professor Soludo championed the banking sector resolution. At that point in time, the most profitable bank in Nigeria was First Bank. It was actually making a profit of about 14 billion a year. Fast forward 15 years down the line, 4 Nigerian banks in Ghana. At that time, only one Nigerian bank had a subsidiary in Ghana. I think it was Standard Trust, now became UBA. 15 years later, 4 Nigerian banks in Ghana, each of them is going to make more profit than the most profitable bank in Nigeria was making in 2004. These are foreign subsidiaries that came out of that consolidation. In fact, if you look at the half-year numbers, some of them have already delivered 12.8 billion and are going to deliver at least 70% more profit. Now, how do we make such transformational moves that enable our local companies become continental players, especially in light of what is happening with the Africa Free Trade Zone, where if we are not careful, we could end up becoming an open market for smaller countries who have a more productive manufacturing base to just sell their products to Nigeria.
Yeah, that's a loaded question in the sense that in 2004, in dollar terms, what was the profitability of First Bank of Nigeria? And if you discount for inflation and everything coming forward. So, yes, it was important based on the unbalanced growth theory that I think that was the whole idea of the Financial Services 2020, that if the banking sector would drive and pull along the other sectors of the economy, and that worked. Now, but that sector pulled, but the other sectors have not. There are some transformational things that need to be done, right? So you have to push what we call the production possibility frontier, right? And if you look at Nigeria's total productivity growth, which is a major pointer towards output, that total productivity growth has actually become negative over the past 10 to 15 years. Labor productivity growth has been negative. So you have three components of national income. You have consumption, you have government, and you have investment. You've got to make up your mind. If you want an investment-led strategy, which is what is the option open to us, then you've got to incentivize investment, both domestic, diaspora, and international. You've got to liberalize the pricing and the structure of this economy so that you can now have the investment multiplier effect, right? Now, the assumption that doing nothing and idle assets, right, means that nothing going on and you are not losing anything is wrong, because idle assets and what we call a negative investment multiplier, right? If we have, with all due respect to the Lagos State Governor, we have this rail infrastructure sitting down there for the past 12 years, which has not been complete. It has not improved labor productivity in Lagos State. So the most important thing is to complete it so that it can increase productivity, and that output and new investment will lead to a multiplier effect on the economy. Now, you brought about the point of regional integration and African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It is true that, let's discount the Trump talk about protectionism and all of that. The world, the European Union is maybe the largest market, right? Africa, the North American Free Trade Area, will go back to globalization. The basis on which economic activity is the mercantilist state, which is the wealth of nations, Adam Smith, big markets, free markets, supported by liberal democracy and all of these things. That's the fundamental structural basis on which economies will grow. So we can benefit from the African, because we have a big market, that is, we have a huge population. Professor Soludo alluded to the fact that it'll be 700 million at the end of the century. So the economies of scale, the localization of industry, investment, you remember I said at the beginning, investment-led strategy. Once we bring those investments in, both domestic and international, with a multiplier effect, then we will benefit more from this African Free Trade Agreement. There's nothing to fear itself, but there's nothing to fear more than fear itself. So I'm of the view that those subsidies in the economy have to be eliminated over time without causing disruption. I am of the view that when the pricing is right, that investment will go after where the revenue is. I'm of the view that investors will respond to what we do more than what we say, right? Because talk is cheap. I'm of the view that this unbalanced growth theory, that is, we used financial services to drive one sector, that all other sectors, pension, telcos, anything to increase total productivity growth is what is going to liberate this economy. Because if not, the present system and the present structure is not sustainable. According to Professor Charles Soludo, whom I respect. Therefore, you've got to fix it now, or else all bets are off. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Mr. Obi, the next question is for you. If you look at the population of Nigeria, which I'll come back to again, at independence, it was about 45 million. Now we're about 206 million. The population of Lagos today is 50% of the population of Nigeria at independence. If anyone told Lagos then that would be the trajectory, no one will believe. Now we're hearing that in the next 15 years, it could be 400 plus million. Unfortunately, what we are banking on today, which is the crude oil, is a commodity that is threatened. 20, 25 years ago, if you look at the largest buyers of our crude, maybe just 4 of them are still on the list. So the US moved itself away to self-sufficiency. India is one of our largest buyers today. They've just announced that they want to phase out petrol-using cars over the next 2 years for electric cars. What we see other countries doing is anything I'm paying for overtly, and I don't have any control about it, let me win myself off it. You spoke about SMEs, the very small contribution they get from banking credit. So the question is, how do we diversify this economy that it's not a podium talk? Because since I was in primary school, I've been hearing diversification. I'm here now, I'm still hearing diversification. Just like I told someone on my table, I said, the life expectancy in Nigeria is 55 years. If most people in this room do not know, if things stand as they are, then in 15 years' time, a lot of people will not be here, just based on life expectancy. So we need to do something. So how do we really diversify this economy?
Well, it's a very simple thing. What has happened is that we are preaching and doing the opposite. We are saying we are going to diversify, we are going to do this, we are going to do this. But if you look at what is happening globally, you see it's a question of saying, oh, we're going to do this, but I'm going to keep everything with me. We have an asset. As far as I'm concerned, oil is no longer a diminishing asset, it's an asset that is obsolete. So you need to invest in the future, in the new assets. When you talked about youth, for example, we have a situation where they are talking that in 4-5 years, there are going to be 20 million jobs within the ICT sector, within the digital sector, and you're not training people for that future. So the investment you need, if Nigeria truly wants to get done with what they are doing, if you look at what, let me even touch a bit of what you said about the banking sector. When the banking sector consolidated, the other sector did not follow up, because what you did is that sector, while it was moving, you find out that the other sectors was being controlled and not allowed to open up. Government need to remove itself and let the economy be driven by private sector. That is why today you are in a bank. The total assets of bank in Nigeria, even with the consolidation, is about $100 billion. The total assets of banks in South Africa is over $500 billion, and there are 55 million people. Total assets of banks in Indonesia, which you are competing, is over. So you have businesses that are supposed to be private sector controlled. What is Nigeria doing with ports? For God's sake, which country is still managing ports? The biggest ports today, 6 of them, 5 is in China. It's not run by government. Singapore, that is the busiest, and building a one for 1950 is not run by government. What is government doing with the airports? That we are building, even borrowing money. Some of the money we owe China today is that we borrowed money to go and do terminal. It's not our business. So there's so many things government is involved in itself that it needs to unleash. That's why our stock market is very shallow. What you have, our capital market is only 31 billion, when South Africa is 1 trillion. So you have a problem. Leave all these things to go, and when they go, people in government will do their job, which is supervision. Government have nothing to do with running a business of port and all these things they're doing.
Okay, that was the last question. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists and guests for the very thoughtful answers that have been provided. Thank you very much. You can go.
Wonderful.